Okay, this is Q&A. The floor is open. Yeah.
I'm trying to paraphrase a question I heard, so it may not come out very smoothly. What exactly is our connection to the dead in terms of the neshamas?
Connection to the?
Like the dead, people who died, in terms of their neshamas, and yeah, let's just start there. Like, do we have any connection to those people? How do we, yeah.
Okay, the question is what connection do we have to the dead? It's a complicated question. I don't know the full answer to it. I know a couple of things that I can share with you. Death is the separation of the soul from the body. The result of which is the body is buried and disintegrates to be, in some sense, reconstituted for resurrection, and the soul goes into a waiting pattern for resurrection. Now, it is conscious, it's undergoing certain types of experience. There's certain results of its activities in life which are being realized for it. I'm basing myself on the sources in the Ramchal. What you do, you as a child, let's say, for your parents who have passed on, is that your mitzvos, your actions, can affect their state in the world to come. Because, since they invested in you, they had an effect on what you do, on how you behave. And therefore, things that you do are a continuation of their investments in the world, so they are a continuation of their record in the world. And just as while they were alive, if they did more mitzvos, they would get more credit. So when you do mitzvahs, you can give them credit also. So that's one way in which you are connected to them. In fact, people have this not wrong impression that you say Kaddish when a parent dies. That's true, but books that deal with the subject say that's the very least you can do. The very least you can do is to say Kaddish. Step up from that is leading the prayers. And a step up from that is doing any mitzvah that you do with them in mind. Especially if you add to the mitzvahs that you have been doing with them in mind, then you create extra merit for them. That's much more important than saying Kaddish. People think, oh, I said Kaddish, so that was it. That's what the Jewish tradition requires. No, that's the cheapest way out. Now, there are midrashim that talk about what the souls of people who pass from the world know about what's going on in the world. And the picture is very various. Some know more, some know less, some know it sometimes and not at other times. Some know about specific subjects, not other subjects. On the yard side, the date of death or date of burial, depending upon which custom you follow, the neshamas is aware of what's going on at the gravesite. During the first year, it's aware of what's going on at the gravesite. So there are different amounts of awareness and different types of connections. When we go to the gravesite of a great person and we pray there, one of the things we pray is that the soul of that person should pray for us also before God. We do not pray to a soul. We do not ask a soul for help. We do not ask for a soul for forgiveness or anything else. That would be absolutely un-Jewish. But just as these people who cared about us while they were alive could pray for us and add thereby to the side of what we were hoping for, so they could do that after they're passed on from this world also. So those are some of the things that are going on. But I'm sure there's much more that I don't know and should ask other people as well. Yeah.
I've had this question for a long time. I've asked a lot of rabbis. I've never got a satisfying answer. God created the world in this, everything so intricately and so perfect. And one of the greatest gifts he gave us was time. It gives value to things. It gives measurements to things. It gives structure. It gives meaning. It gives a sense of urgency to life itself. But why did he give it to us in this really obviously in perfect form, in that the number that the Earth travels around the sun a year, and the number of hours in a day that the globe does a circle, the two numbers aren't evenly divisible. So you have this really awkward calendar of like leap years, and then every so many years you have to switch it, and it's just like, it just seems so obviously like, or it's just so clunky for such a perfect thing in such an otherwise perfect world that he's created.
An interesting question. First of all, let's take the word perfect and do a little work on it. I get in the mail a box, and on the cover of the box is a beautiful, beautiful picture. Wow, somebody sent me a picture. That's really nice. I open up the box. No, not a picture. It's full of small, irregularly shaped pieces of cardboard. Oh, this must be a mistake. Somebody, some kid must have gotten to it with scissors or something. Where's my picture? No, it's a puzzle. Well, is it perfect or not? It's not a picture. It doesn't look like anything nice. It's just a chunk of a bag full of pieces. Now listen carefully. It's a perfect puzzle, isn't it? It's a perfect puzzle. As a puzzle that you're supposed to put together. It's perfect. It wasn't supposed to be a picture. So a thing can be perfect by being incomplete. A thing can be perfect by being broken. A thing can be perfect by being only raw materials. Because the question, perfect means ideally suited to its purpose, whatever its purpose is. So one of the things that we are taught is that God created the world incomplete, and that our efforts complete it and perfect it. So we don't expect it to be perfect in the sense of set up with absolute and perfect and obvious precision. We said that we have to bring that kind of perfection to the world. Not that it should be created that way by him. If it was created that way by him, it could be an act for a solo performance. You could create it and contemplate it. We wouldn't leave anything left for us to do. That's one point. A much deeper point, the dream of science at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, was everything's going to boil down to a simple, clear, familiar, and self-explanatory picture. Let's take what things are made out of. Things are made out of tiny pebbles. Like Democritus and the atomists in the ancient Greeks. Everything's made out of pieces. Each piece has a shape, has certain qualities, and those qualities combine together to make larger things, and that explain why things do what they do, and it's going to be simple. Simple and clear and explanatory. We're able to explain the idea to an intelligent 9-year-old. And when the subatomic particles were first discovered, at the end of the 1920s, there was a time when they thought there were only two particles, a proton and an electron. Wow. Everything's made out of two things. Think of the gigantic variety of things that are in the universe. It all boils down to two things, a proton and an electron. That's astonishing. Now you could tell a kid, it's these two things put together in myriad ways. Yeah, but it isn't, because there are other particles. Maybe there's 16 particles, or maybe 32 particles, or if you have supersymmetry, there are 64 particles. And some of them have weird properties. Neutrinos, there are 3 different types of neutrinos, and when a neutrino is traveling through space, it changes from one into the other. And then particles themselves, if you have quantum mechanics, they only have the properties you measure. In the meantime, they don't have any properties at all. A free particle has no position, no momentum, no spin. You measure it and it gets it. Before that, it's in a probability wave, and so forth and so on. It turned out to be utterly mysterious. Instead of being clean and clear and obvious, it turned out to be utterly mysterious. If there's any message from the Creator to us, it's, I want you to struggle with mysteries. I don't want this to be something which, by the time you're 12, you'll be bored with it because you understand it already. And by the way, you're an American, I take it. Canadian, that's just as bad. And, I don't know if you went through this experiment, but in the 70s and 80s, in the United States of America, they tried to switch over to the metric system. And there was a time when speed signs and distance signs had two figures, the present system and the metric system. It didn't work. They took down the metric. They'd rather have feet and inches and miles and so on and so on, rather than everything divisible by 10. Because it's familiar, and they're used to it, and it's much more complicated than the metric system, but that's the way they do it. So there's no hint whatsoever that everything should be simple and clear, well structured in a way that it's palatable and easy for the human mind. People talk about one of the favorite things that people have against religion, especially people who believe in evolution, poor souls, that there are so many engineering failures in the human body. Well, the first thing is, if you look up the literature, which nobody does, you'll find out that all the ones they thought were mistakes aren't mistakes. They're really ideal. But aside from that, we would never think that God made an ideal human body. Why would we think that? If part of the purpose of creation is to give us enough freedom to act on our own, and if he were visible and manifest all the time, that would leave us very little freedom because we'd be overwhelmed by his presence, sort of like not taking cookies from the cookie jar while your father's looking at the cookie jar. That's not a test of your free will, is it? You're just not going to do it. So part of his purpose is to hide his presence in the world. Then you see things that look like they're not ideally engineered. That's part of the way he hides his presence in the world. Because if everything were ideally engineered, you'd have the open manifestation of this supernatural ability all around you, and your ability to act independently without being overwhelmed by his presence would be compromised. So there are a number of reasons why we don't expect the world to look perfect in these respects. Even though the particular respects that they pick out, so-called vestigial organs and the poorly designed eye and all the rest, turn out to be mistakes in the end, because they didn't do the biology carefully enough. But we don't expect things to be simple and easy and commensurate like that. And the more you study about the world, the more mysterious it becomes, not the more plain and obvious it becomes. Yeah. Who's up? Yeah.
So sometimes more understanding of passages can enhance our experience of them. And in davening, there's obviously a lot of depth there, as an understatement. I was wondering if you had in mind like an exposition of a particular passage in davening, which would change it, like if you understood that and you knew it, and you could interact with it in a certain way, it would change your davening experience going forward, as long as you remembered it and remembered how to approach it properly.
Well, your davening experience, first, there's a lot of text to davening, and then each person's experience is different in significant ways. But I'll give you just one example. There's a word that repeats itself fairly often in davening, and that's baruch, right? Probably say that 200 times a day, 300 times a day. What does baruch mean? That's a big issue, lots of literature. But here's one thought which I think you see in the word baruch, an encapsulation of the main picture of how Judaism looks at the world. On one grammar of baruch, it's a passive. Shavur means broken. Baruch means blessed. Of course, what does blessed mean? Nobody talks that way. It means something that has received a blessing. It's a passive voice. Something has happened to it. Like being broken means something broke it. Being blessed means something blessed it. So when you say Baruch about Hashem, you're saying he's blessed. You think, really? Somebody or something gave him a blessing? Wonder what that means. What is a blessing? A blessing is something that's really good for you. We have in English this expression, a blessing in disguise. It means, boy, I didn't like it when I got it, but it turned out to be very good in the end. A blessing is something that's really good for you. Somebody gave something to Hashem that's really good for him that he didn't have before. Isn't he perfect? Does he need anything? Good questions. We'll come back to that. So now, once is that he receives a blessing. The Rashba and Yaakov says that another reading of it is that it is a source of blessing. Like the words Rachu and Chanun. Rachu means merciful, means one who gives mercy. Chanun means gracious, means one who treats people graciously. Oh, that has a pasuk. There's a comments. The grammarians talk about that. Baruch means a source of blessing. So now there begins to emerge a kind of reciprocal structure here. God is both a recipient of blessing and a source of blessing. Wonder how that works. And maybe if we had the other end of the interaction, we could see that it's a two-sided mutual relationship. Now, if you haven't guessed, we are the other end of the interaction. So, we stand in a blessing and blessed relationship to God, as just as He does to us. We give blessing to Him, and He gives blessing to us. Okay, now how does that work? Well, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in creating the world, had infinity of purposes, but here are two of them. One of them is to benefit His creatures, in particular to benefit mankind, to express good to them. That's one principle. And the other principle is that for the good to be the ideal good, they should earn it. It should be theirs because of their own activity. Now, those two principles mean that for Him to enact the first principle, He needs us to qualify for the second principle. In order for Him to enact giving the benefit to us, since He wants to give it on the condition that we earn it, when we earn the blessing, we thereby enable Him to give us the blessing. Oh ho! And since what He wants to do is give the blessing, if we do something that enables Him to do what He wants, then we're giving Him something that's really good for Him. So here's how it works. I work to enable, to earn what He wants to give me, and thereby set up the conditions through which He can give. I have now benefited Him by providing Him with something that He wants, which is good for Him. He then provides me with the good, which was the purpose of the whole transaction, and thereby gives me a blessing by giving me something that's good for me. Baruch encapsulates this reciprocal interaction with God of mutual blessing and being blessed. I think that's not a small idea. That's not a small idea. And when you feel that reciprocal interaction, if you just have that, you sort of encapsulate that into a feeling, like Thomas Damasio would say. So then, when you say Baruch and you have that feeling, you already have something that's going to go through you. You say Baruch a lot of times in the davening. That's a really fundamental idea of how we relate to Kodesh Baruch.
Is it just a quick thought that when you say Baruch, is that an action for which you have merit, which is then opening up?
Of course, but that's all the other words also. That's not specifically for the word Baruch. Yeah.
How do you balance out fearing God and loving Him? How does that go together?
Oh, I spoke about that a couple of weeks ago. I spoke there for an hour down here, but I'll give you the one part of the solution. I worked on this for a long, long time. I read sources on it. The question is a good question because, like the Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei Torah, Perek Beis Halacha Beis, that's the laws of the fundamentals of the Torah, chapter 2, paragraph 2, says that when you study God's actions and you come to see the wisdom in them, and if you add in what he says in the Sefer HaMitzvos, it also includes studying Torah, you see the wisdom in that, you then feel a desire to grow close, to come to understand more, to be related to relate to, you have a natural reaction of love. Then you enter into more investigation and more understanding, and then at a certain point you think, wait a minute, what I know about HaKadosh Baruch Hu is vastly, vastly beyond what I am. I am small, I'm finite and crippled and compromised in various ways, and my record isn't perfect, so it's on. Do I belong together with, sharing with, partners with the creator of the universe? Certainly not. You develop yira, which in this sense is awe, and you step back. You're driven backwards because you feel the inappropriateness of your relating to something that great. That's where the potential for an incompatibility comes between love and awe. And I think what overcomes the incompatibility is a third thing, and that's relationship. I'll give you an example. Let's suppose you get an invitation to a birthday party. Now, in this example, there are many different people who could send the invitation. It could be a neighbor from down the block. He's making a block party. He's inviting you to the block party. Or it could be a neighbor that you talk to and interact with and share with. Or it could be an uncle, a relative. Or it could be your grandfather celebrating his 84th birthday. Or it could be someone who has benefited the family, whose family has benefited the family for generations and wants you to attend their party. Or it could be a political figure, if you could find one, who's really honest and sincere and beloved and has served the community, and everyone benefits from that person's thoughtfulness and generosity and leadership and so forth and so on. Or it could be Elijah the prophet. You could get an invitation to a birthday party from many different sources. You'll feel very different about the different invitations. The neighbor from down the block, Oshkan Shalom, maybe I will, maybe I won't. That's what's convenient or not. Next door neighbor, listen, we have a relationship. I'd like to do something nice for him. My grandfather's 84th birthday, that's precious. Political figure, Elijah the prophet wants me at his birthday party? Are you kidding? He wants me? Yeah, so then it's very precious. The greater the other person is, the bigger the gap between you and the other person, the more precious the invitation. Now let's suppose the invitation is not for a birthday party. I'll give you another example to make this vivid. Picasso sends out an advertisement. I want someone to be my assistant for a year. Assistant means set up the easel, clean the brushes, get the paints, clean up afterwards, make the trained arrangements. Also, since my assistant should be a painter, you'll have time to paint also, and I'll look at your works, and I'll comment on them for you. And if you have questions about my works, I'll answer them to you, and I want you to be my assistant for a year. How precious do you think that would be to an aspiring painter? A year with Picasso? He would pay, and Picasso's going to pay his expenses. Fine. He takes it. He's with Picasso for a year. At the end of the year, Picasso says, "You know something? I think you have talent. I think you're okay. I have a suggestion. Let's paint pictures together. Together. Yeah, you'll paint the background, and I'll paint the foreground. Background is, just a staging for the foreground, and you're pretty good, and I think, you could do it. And then we'll hang them up in the museums. Picasso and George." What? Picasso and George? My name will go down in the history of art, for generations. What could be more precious than that? The very fact that Picasso is infinitely greater than George makes the relationship with Picasso infinitely precious to George. Here's how awe can contribute to love. Because if the awe is there first, and the one for whom you have awe invites you into a relationship with him, especially a partnership with him, then that's going to generate love. And that's exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did with us. It's not awe and love as raw emotions, each taking its own spot and trying to combine them as a combined experience. It's awe and love in the context of an invited relationship. And there, I think they do reinforce one another. I think you should ask other people also. I don't think this is the only solution. But this is the solution that I came to, given what I know about general sources. Yeah.
It's interesting how you referred to awe as fear. I thought fear was more of like...
So in Hebrew, there's a word for fear, and that's pachad. Pachad is what you feel if you cross Times Square blindfolded. You're just waiting to get hit by the next truck. Awe in the Hebrew is yira, and the mitzvah we're talking about is yira, never pachad. No, it's once pachad, but it's 44 times yira. And yira can mean the same as pachad in some contexts, but in other contexts it definitely means awe. It means a sense of overwhelming greatness as opposed to my smallness and insignificance. Not that I'm afraid of something bad's going to happen to me. Yeah.
A moment ago when I asked the question about the connection to the dead, you brought up the idea how you're continuing your parents' merits through your own mitzvahs and deeds on this planet.
Okay, let me give you an example, okay, and see if, because to me I think this is a very intuitive idea. I don't think it's a strange idea. Here's a story of a person that I actually heard about that actually did this. This fellow lived in Europe, I don't know, 200 years ago, and he was wealthy. Somebody came to him whose business was failing and said, "Listen, I need a loan. And I think if I have a loan, my business will recover and I'll pay you back." So the wealthy man said, "Fine," and he gave him the loan. 2 years later, the fellow's business did recover and he came to pay it back. And the wealthy man said, "I don't want your money." So the borrower said, "Listen, I didn't ask you for charity and you didn't offer me charity. I asked you for a loan, you gave me a loan, and I want to pay it back." So the rich man said, "No, here's what I mean. I gave you the money, your business has recovered. When you hear about somebody whose business is failing, then you give him the money with the same condition. Tell him you're lending it to him, and when he wants to pay it back, tell him that he should give it to somebody else whose business is failing." How much charity can you get out of one contribution? This contribution will be generating charity until the Messiah comes. Now, the first rich man who set it up, won't he get credit for each of the subsequent loans that saves a business? Won't he get credit for that? Because he set it up. He set the chain rolling, and it was his money that's being handed from hand to hand. Even after he's dead, won't he get credit for the fact that all those businesses are being saved through his initiation? So the fact that you set up a chain of consequences which benefits people, if you are the cause of those consequences, you get benefit for everything that chain produces in the future, whether you're alive or not alive. The same thing is true with your investment in your children. If you invest in your children, you try to inspire them, and you encourage them, and you educate them, and you put them in a context in which their character develops well, and then they do things that are good thereafter, they redound to the credit of the parent even after the parent dies, because he set up that chain of consequences. Is there some difficulty here in understanding the idea?
No.
Okay. So what's the problem?
I was going to ask a different question.
Well, take turns, okay. We'll take turns, yeah.
There's a line where it says that the angels give themselves permission to praise Hashem, or they give each other.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
What's going on there? Give me the sitter. There's something here that people don't know. I only discovered it by chance. I mean, by divine providence, but I wasn't looking for it. When we say Kodosh, 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 the description is really quite dramatic. Ministering angels all stand at the summit of the universe and proclaim with awe, together, loudly, the words of the living God, King of the universe. They're all beloved, they're all flawless, they're almighty, they all do the will of their Maker with dread and reverence. They all open their mouths in holiness and purity, in song and hymn and praise, the name of the great, mighty, and awesome King. Then they all accept upon themselves the yoke of heavenly sovereignty from one another. It's an interaction. One says to the other, "I'm pledging myself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu," each one to the other. And grant permission to one another to sanctify the one who formed them. Be ready. You be ready. I'm ready. Let's do it together. With clear speech, sweetness, all of them as one, proclaim his holiness and say with awe, etc., etc. The picture here is a choir of brothers and cousins, choir of singers who love one another and want to express it as a joint expression together. The next phrase has a different introduction. Then the Ofanim, which is one type of angels, and the Holy Chayos, with great noise, not song, not sweetness, not together, not organized, not giving permission, no, with great noise, raise themselves towards the Seraphim and praise, give praise, saying. It's a completely contrastive picture. So the Ramchal, I believe this is in the Adir Bamrom where I saw it, one of the great Kabbalists, says these are two different positions. The first verse comes from the book of Isaiah. Isaiah lived in the land of Israel at a time when the temple was standing. Second comes from the book of Ezekiel, who lived in Babylon, in exile. The sweetness, organization, coherence, community of difference acting together, that's a sign of things being as they should be, with the temple standing and with the service being done in the way it was supposed to be done. Noise, confusion, disunity, that's exile. In exile, that's the situation that you're dealing with. So the picture is an entirely different picture. And in Kedushas you have the same introductions. So you're getting a picture of these angels are interacting in a way which shows that even though each angel has a different essence, each angel is dedicated to a different procedure, a different process, but they form an integrated unity with one another, and they instituted on their own, with their own, because this is what they're given to do, but the activity is their own activity of joining together and creating an integrated performance. That's the picture that we're getting here. The details would require extra analysis and extra explanation, but that's the picture that you're getting. This idea of taking disparate elements and integrating them. By the way, when you talk about two things being one or unifying, there are two different ways to do this, and actually three, which I learned from my Rebbetzin recently. Another one I didn't take into account. But there are two that you have to keep distinct. You could say that A and B become one, meaning A and B become identical. They fuse into one thing. That's one way. There's a different way. It's like the hardware and software in your computer work together to make a functioning computer. The hardware isn't the software. The software isn't the hardware. Hardware and software together integrate into a functioning unit. That's another way of becoming one. It means integrating together to a compound which is singly functional. That's what's going on here. That's essential to the Jewish religion. The 12 tribes. 12 different tribes. Each tribe had a tribal leader. Each tribe had its own courts, its own legal system. And they integrated into a single entity, a single nation. It took time. There were hundreds of years when there was no king before Saul became king. And there were local temporary leaders when there were wars. The rest of the time, each tribe was functioning on its own. So the idea of integrating disparate elements into an integrated functional unity is essential to the Jewish religion. Anyway, that's a little background. Yeah.
Based off my previous question I asked, to what extent are aveiros also our parents are responsible for?
Oh, I think that's right. I think that's right. Something which, God forbid, a vicious parent programs into his child, or it could be an ignorant parent who wants to do the right thing, but in fact influences the child to do things that are that are wrong, will suffer for that. It's not a one-sided calculation.
Even if they're like full-fledged adults who are making their own decisions?
Well, you make decisions on the basis of the raw materials you have at hand. And those include both the kinds of ideals and values that you think are important, and also the impulses to evil that you have to struggle with. There was, I don't know how many years, how many decades ago this was, the idea of number one. What's in it for number one? Books of psychology, right? Guess who number one is? Not God, not your parents, it's you. You should be thinking about yourself. You should be doing for yourself. Otherwise, you're being used by others. There's a horrible phrase in modern Hebrew, very recent Hebrew, called a friar. A friar is someone who does things for other people and doesn't get anything back. He's being used. He's a toady. He's just a guy who's shining your shoes. The idea of doing chesed, looking for opportunities to help other people in ways that I don't need to be compensated. Contrary, I am a better person because I help them. Indeed, what is the Creator doing all the time other than helping us? Does that make him second class? The great friar in the sky, the Creator, who's, just, unfortunately, just doing for others. I mean, now, you program a kid with that, and he lives with that, that cripples him. And then, to the extent that you knew what you were doing, you bear some responsibility for saddling the child with that crippled performance. So I think it works both ways. I understand that it works both ways. Yeah, who else is up? Okay.
So I was thinking about holiness. So we said before that it relates to being attached towards something. Could it be that, like, at the farthest end of the chain, you can describe something as holy because it facilitates the whole chain to begin with?
Okay, let me bring people into the discussion. This is something that I worked out for a long time. Till I saw some things in the Ramchal and put two and two together. There are a lot of things that the Jewish religion calls holy. There are people who are holy. Jews have a certain holiness. Priests have a higher holiness. Maybe Levites have a higher holiness. Animals can be made holy by making them into a sacrifice, or they're being born as a sacrifice, like the firstborn. Places are holy. There's the Temple Mount. There's the city of Jerusalem. There's the land of Israel. A Torah scroll is holy. Phylacteries, tefillin, and mezuzahs are holy. There are lots of things that are holy, and many of them we can create. We can make them holy. What does it mean to be holy? So if you look at them, there seems to be a common theme. I think I heard this from Rabbi Soloveitchik many, many years ago. A thing is holy because it's set aside for a particular godly purpose, and because it's set aside for that godly purpose, it acquires prohibitions that other things in its category don't have. It's like your ability to use it is very strongly curtailed because it's set aside for that purpose. So you designate an animal to be a sacrifice, you can't have any benefit from the animal. You can't plow with it, you can't shear its wool and make it into a coat. You can't plow, you can't do anything with it, you can just use it for a sacrifice. Torah scroll, you can read from it, learn from it, but that's it. You can't do anything else with it. So, there are foods that are holy that, number one, only certain people can eat, like truma for Kohanim, or sacrifices for Kohanim, or the person who brings the sacrifice, and you have to be in a state of ritual purity. If you don't, you defile it and it can't be used. There are all sorts of prohibitions that surround it because it's dedicated to this higher purpose. Okay, having given that description of what holiness is, the granddaddy of all questions is, how could God be holy? How could God be holy? Are you going to apply the formula to God? Oh, see, God is dedicated to something higher. And because he's dedicated to something higher, therefore, he thereby acquires significance and meaning and value. And then, when he does that, prohibitions arise. That God should acquire his holiness from something higher than he is a contradiction in terms. There's nothing higher than God. So, how are you going to apply the term holy to God? There's a cheater's way out to say, listen, Rabbi, you have a word in Hebrew, when it applies to people it means one thing, when it applies to God it means another thing. God and people are different. So the word has to mean something different. That's a cheater's way out because, first of all, these words are written in books that some of which God dictated for us. So we're supposed to understand them. So to say, who knows what justice is for God? Who knows what goodness is for God? Is to mean that God, when he wrote us these books, is shooting himself in the foot, because he wrote it to us and we don't understand it. And we might think we understand it, we're just making a mistake. God doesn't make mistakes like that. So there's got to be some commonality. At this point, marches in the Kabbalah. Kabbalah has a solution for this. as it has solution for many things. The answer is this, that we don't talk about God, G-O-D, at all. God is beyond all human understanding, beyond our comprehension, beyond our conceptualization, beyond our linguistic descriptions. God is utterly transcendent. By the way, the philosophical tradition and the Kabbalistic tradition both agree on this principle. Maimonides says it in the guide, word for word, part 1, chapter 54. Okay, so what do we talk about? We talk about God's principles of action. Even the divine names in the Talmud, which is not openly a mystical tract, the Talmud associates each of God's names with principles of action. Only in the Talmud, it looks like it's association. There's God and his action. And the mystical tradition says, but really, when you're using the names, you're talking about principles of action. Okay, there are many names, and there are many principles of action. Loving kindness is one principle of action, and strict justice is another principle of action. Mercy is another principle of action. Loving kindness is another kind of... There are lots of different principles of action. Well, they're not all equal. They're in a hierarchy. When we say that God created the world for loving kindness, and that's the ultimate purpose, that puts, in a certain sense, loving kindness at the top of the hierarchy. And it means all the other principles of action have to serve that principle of action in some way or another, have to express it in certain way, in some way or another. Now, let's say again, kadosh means a thing acquires meaning and value by relating to something higher than it, and then it stands in service to it, and that's how it gets its purpose and its value. Well, maybe we could take a lower principle of action and then ask how it relates to a higher principle of action. So the Ramchal, the Rosh Chaim Lutzato, there is a volume which takes the philosophical writings in his letters and excerpts them from the letters and prints them. And in one of them, which my oldest son showed me, he defines kadosh as bo kodesh. Kadosh is the adjective holy. Kodesh is the noun holiness. Holiness is a thing unto itself. Kadosh attaches to a thing, Q, which has some kadosh character. Holiness is the thing itself, and kadosh is a quality of something else that's related to it. So he says there's one level, which is kadosh, because the thing above it, which is kodesh, is related to it and expresses itself through it, and that's how the bottom one becomes kadosh. So now it's really the same meaning. It's really the same meaning. A thing becomes kadosh because it's related to something higher than it, which gives it its meaning and its value. And then you have a chain. Each one relates to the one above it. And by the way, for those who know a little bit of Hebrew, a little bit of liturgy, in Hebrew we say Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and in Aramaic we say Kudsha Brichu. It's not the same. They're not synonymous. Because Kadosh is the adjective, and in Aramaic Kudsha is the noun. The Hebrew word corresponding to Kudsha is Kodesh, not Kadosh. So the Aramaic phrase has a different meaning. At any rate, there's a little introduction to what Kadosh means. In this way, because we don't speak about the agent behind the actions, we only speak about the principles of action, and there are many of them. So each one of them, you can talk about it as being Kadosh and the way it relates to the next level. That's a little introduction to what Kadosh means. Yeah.
How does one work more on his emuna, with understanding that God is running everything?
Well, how does one work on it? Again, this is a psychological question, which is a good question. I'm not trained in psychology at all, so I like I always say, you should ask other people because other people will do things in different ways. But I think studying what we know about the lives of great people and studying what we know about Jewish history and just internalizing the things that happen and paying close attention to what happens to you. I was in a taxi 2 weeks ago. Taxi driver. We got to talking. We're talking about winning the lottery, I told him studies have been done. Most people who win the lottery, their lives are ruined by it. He said, I know it from experience. My grandfather won the lottery. He divorced. All of his children divorced, and he died penniless. It ruined him. Just ruined him. Okay. Then he says to me, Rabbi, I have experienced divine providence. I want to tell you what happened. He said, I was discharged from the Army 30 years ago, and I decided to become a taxi cab driver. So I joined an intercity taxi cab company, and I living in Jerusalem. He said, I didn't realize that they work on Shabbat. Friday, when I ended the day's work, the dispatcher said, we'll see you here tomorrow, right? I said, what are you talking about? Shabbat? He said, yeah. That's how most of our business is on Shabbat. Of course, you have to drive on Shabbat. So he said, I lost that battle. I went and I drove, felt terrible. I needed a job. I wanted the money. The next week, he said, I was torturing myself. I lost the battle again. Second Shabbos, I was driving. And one of the trips I had to make was to take foreign workers, non-Jews, to the place of work. I thought, I'm a Jew. And I'm driving a car on Shabbat to drive non-Jews to their destination. No, I'm not doing this. He walked into the dispatcher on Sunday morning, gave him the keys and said, I'm finished with this. What? I'm finished with this. I'm not doing this. And he said, I said to God, I'm not going to violate your Shabbat. You have to help me. He joined another taxi company, a small one. He started to work, and he made a decent living. Got married, started to have children. He was reasonably happy. Everything was fine. 10 years later, he's sitting in central Jerusalem in his taxi with passengers in the back at a red light. Suddenly, he gets an irrepressible urge, grab the wheel, and when the light turns green, press the accelerator to the floor. Jam it to the floor! He himself didn't know where this came from, and he couldn't resist. So he grabbed the wheel, staring at the light. It turns green. He slams it to the floor. 2 seconds later, there's an explosion behind him. The Sbarro restaurant was blown up in central Jerusalem. He was parked next to the Sbarro restaurant. That happened to him once in his lifetime. He said, I've been driving a cab for 30 years. It only happened that time. Never before and never since. Nothing like it has ever happened. That's not an accident. So he said, I know that God did that for me. Now, and he said to me, you're hearing this from the first source. It happened to me. It happened to me 20 years ago. So you're hearing secondhand. But so you have instances like this. You think, is he a liar? Is he on drugs? Is he making it up? Is he trying to impress me? Probably not. Probably not. He had this experience. I can tell you for myself, when I became religious, and I was convinced that the Tanakh is God's word, and the Talmud is true, and the mitzvahs have to be done, and all the rest, when people told me stories like this, I said, leave me alone. I don't need them. I'm doing fine. I believe. I don't have doubts. I don't need these things. You heard stories about Hasidic rabbis and so forth and so on. I think, yeah, okay, maybe yes, maybe no, but it's not part. I don't need that, right? Then it started to happen to me. No, I pride myself on my open-mindedness. I'm an empiricist. If I see it myself, then I have to think again. I have to try to recalculate. It happened to me enough times to realize that not everything is the way the secular professor tells you it is, that it's all accidental and, all a matter of natural law. It just isn't so. But keep your eyes open, be open-minded, and take a look. Ask people what has happened to them in their lives. And I think you will find a number of times that things happen which indicate that Hashgacha Pratis, individual providence, is going on, and then keep them in mind. Don't let yourself forget them. I remember the first one that happened to me. I was together with my Rebbe for 47 years. I guess for 43 of them I was married. We were very close to the Rebbe. He called us often enough. We called him many times. We went to be with him many times. Hundreds of times. One Friday morning, he called up. I picked up the phone, and he said, let me speak to your wife. Not hello, how are you? have a good Shabbos. Nothing. Let me speak to your wife. I put her on the phone. He said to her, are you all right? She said, yeah, I'm fine. He asked her 3 times if she's all right, and then he said, okay, have a nice Shabbos. The phone was hung up. She looked at me. I looked at her. This was utterly uncharacteristic. On Sunday, she had a miscarriage. Okay? We had altogether 9 pregnancies. We had 6 children and 3 miscarriages, right? We knew him for 47 years. 1 telephone call in 47 years. What's the chance of getting that right by accident? I think it's 0. So, something like that happens. You think, okay, there are things going on that are beyond the normal. Right? And if you just keep those in mind, I think that can help you feel that, when you don't see what's going on, then you say, okay, so God is hiding us. He's most of the time. It isn't showing me himself. But enough of these happen, enough of these happen to other people that, that should be able to, like King David, go to the crossing of the sea, the Jews in Babylon. There are lots of things to look at in that respect. Yeah.
What do you say to people? Because I've had one of those crazy hishkaka. That's how I got here. Was those experience like that man had. But I don't tell people usually because I've told a couple people that thought I was lying or thought I was on drugs when it happened.
That's right.
Or whatever. So what would you say? Is there anything you can say, or should you just not tell the story?
Yeah, I think, the Gemara has a phrase, just as it is a mitzvah to say that which will be heard, it is a mitzvah to not say that which will not be heard. And I think this is a question of sensitivity and kindness to the other person. Because if you say something that he can't hear, you're putting him in a position where he's going to reject it, and he's going to create negative attitudes, and then you've injured him. It's not fair to him. In education, you have this all the time, because you can't tell a beginning student something which only an advanced student can understand. Why would you do that? So I think you have to choose your audience. And I think you're discovering that there are people who will do anything to protect themselves against something that threatens their stability or threatens their view of the world. We had a guy who was here for a couple of months, and he checked out of the yeshiva, and he told us, he said, you're giving me ideas, you're giving me evidence, you're giving me arguments, I can't answer them. I'm afraid where this is going to end up. So I'm leaving, because I don't want it to end up there. Not because he has a complaint that we said something wrong or made a mistake. No, we said too many right things. And he could already chart where it's going to, So I think you have to be selective of the people to whom you tell these things. It's very important. Yeah.
I may ask Rabbi, I have a question. I was thinking one day, and I was wondering, how do we know for a fact, Jews, a big part of Judaism is a lineage.
Is what?
Is lineage, is that we can trace our lineage from Avraham Avinu. How do we know for a fact that on our mother's line, there wasn't somewhere down the line that there was, God forbid, our mother's mother, hundreds of years back, maybe wasn't a Jew or lied or wasn't a proper married, or even more so that there was a mamzer down the line from incorrect marriage or divorce or something. And would that because to be a Jew is not just a bloodline, it's a spiritual aspect that comes from your mother being a line from on a Jewish line. So how can we be certain that on that line it's correct? And what is a person that comes from maybe hundreds of years ago, one of their ancestors was either not really a Jew, or maybe lied, or maybe they did a false conversion or something like that. Would they still have a Jewish neshama? How would you know what would be any different?
Well, first of all, I think if you'll examine your own vocabulary, your vocabulary is, how do I know for sure? Isn't it possible that? My philosophical position on those questions is don't take them seriously. Even leprechauns are possible. The fact that something's possible should play almost no role in your thinking at all. Is it possible that in the next 5 minutes there'll be an earthquake here and you'll be swallowed up by the open earth? Sure, it's possible. Earthquakes take place. Possibility is too cheap. What you want to ask is it probable? Do I have any reason to think that it really occurred? Now, you know that we have kept a group identity for thousands of years. And then let's say, by the way, that you have 16 generations ago, your mother's 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 mother, so on and so on, right, was not Jewish. But that doesn't mean that her child isn't Jewish, because the child can count as a convert. If the child is dedicated to the Jewish religion, then that child will count as Jewish. Wasn't born Jewish. But the fact that you're not born Jewish doesn't mean you're not Jewish. If you attach yourself to the Jewish religion, then you can be Jewish without being born Jewish. So it doesn't mean that you're not Jewish. It just means you don't have a line going all the way back to that. But then, who cares about that? Why is that important? The Haggadah says there were 5 great scholars who made their Seder in Bnei Brak. And they stayed up all night, and their disciples had to tell them the sun has risen, the time for saying the Haggadah is over. And the commentators point out, not one of them had ancestors who was a slave in Egypt. Not one. Because some of them were Leviim, who weren't enslaved, and some came from converts, which means the great-great-great-grandfather was non-Jewish. And then this one converted, and then this one, and they became some of the greatest scholars in the history of the Jewish religion. So what do I care whether my lineage traces out someplace? So what? I mean, Abraham's lineage traces out, and then we all trace out through Terach, Abraham's father, who was an idol worshiper. So what?
And may I ask a follow-up? But the reason why is because I believe that I thought that someone like that's adopted, for example, and that is raised Jewish his whole life, he's gonna have to be told that he's not a Jew. He's gonna have to convert, do a formal conversion, halachically. I could be wrong, but that's what I thought that was.
Yeah, that's what should be done, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't count as Jewish if it doesn't get done. The question is, what counts as being Jewish? After all, before the Torah was given, all you had to do was pledge allegiance. Right? Here's a person who has pledged allegiance to the Jewish religion, and he's just like we don't have the korban, the sacrifice to give now, which was necessary for conversion beforehand. We don't have any sacrifices today. We do have converts today. I think this is not going to be a problem. It does not come out that the person is Jewish. Is not Jewish. If you find it out, then he should go through a conversion procedure. It doesn't mean without it that he's not. There are different things that there's like with a default position when you're not doing everything that needs to be done. What's the status when you don't do everything that needs to be done? Doesn't necessarily mean that you don't get the benefit. I've got to go upstairs and teach. Last question. I've got to run.
Probably the same answer that you just gave, but is it the same idea with Levium and Kalani? Like, if you're unsure where it's tracked or how it's tracked, you just kind of ignore the possibility and look at the probability?
Yes, for sure. Probability by us is very, very important. We hold Kanachar Arov. You use the majority to decide how to behave in a particular situation, and many hold that it's equivalent to establishing the fact. It's equivalent to establishing the fact.